January 2026, the Middle East. In our last briefing, we analyzed the mathematics behind the USS Abraham Lincoln's emergency sprint from the Pacific. We looked at the nuclear propulsion, the logistics of speed, and the sheer audacity of moving 100,000 tons of sovereignty across the globe in record time. But today, a new variable has appeared on the radar, and this one changes the equation entirely. The Pentagon has officially activated Operation Agile Spartan 26.1. If you read the press releases, the media is calling this a joint exercise. They are calling it a routine training event designed to foster inter-service interoperability between the Navy and the Air Force. Do not believe the handshake. In the military world, you do not mobilize a strategic fighter squadron, tank them across 7,000 miles of ocean, and deploy them into the most volatile choke point on Earth just to do calisthenics. This is not a drill. This is a rehearsal. But look closer at the guest list. Who did the Air Force send to this party? They didn't send the F-22 Raptor, the king of the sky. They didn't send the B-21 Raider, the nuclear ghost. They sent the 494th Fighter Squadron, the Panthers, and they are flying the F-15E Strike Eagle. This is the anomaly. The F-15 is a design from the 1970s. It has the radar cross-section of a barn door. It is loud. It is dirty. It is technically obsolete in the age of stealth. So here's the question you need to ask. Why does the United States Navy, the force that possesses the USS Abraham Lincoln, the most powerful mobile airbase in human history, need help from a 50-year-old Air Force jet? Is the king of the sea unable to protect itself? The answer is yes, but not for the reasons you think. This is the paradox. Why do we pair the F-35C, the most advanced, invisible stealth fighter ever built, with the F-15E, a brute force relic of the Cold War? One is invisible, the other is a target. One is a scalpel, the other is a sledgehammer. The analysts in Washington call this a regression. Here at Navy Decoded, we call it the physics of volume. Stealth has a price. To be invisible, you have to hide your weapons. To hide your weapons, you have to shrink them. But when your target is a command bunker buried under 30 feet of reinforced concrete, subtlety is useless. Stealth doesn't break concrete. Mass breaks concrete. You don't need a ghost. You need a truck. Today, we are going to decode how the Pentagon is turning an obsolete airframe into the most dangerous component of the modern kill chain. We are going to ignore the politics. We are going to ignore the press release. We are going to look at the physics of destruction. Welcome back to Navy Decoded. To understand why the F-15E is here, you first have to understand why the carrier is failing. And I don't mean mechanical failure. I mean geometric failure. Look at the map, the Persian Gulf. To a tourist, it's water. To a naval strategist, it is a bathtub. It is a geographic trap. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. For a Nimitz-class carrier, entering this water is a nightmare. A carrier relies on maneuverability. It relies on disappearing into the open ocean. But inside the Gulf, the USS Abraham Lincoln becomes a fixed target in a very small cage. That is why, in 2026, the Lincoln is not in the Gulf. It is forced to hold station here, in the North Arabian Sea, outside the range of the coastal batteries. But safety creates distance. And this brings us to the first variable, space saturation. Right now, looking at the Iranian coast, we aren't just seeing a few missile batteries. We are seeing thousands of short-range ballistic missiles, or SRBMs. We are seeing anti-ship cruise missiles. We are seeing hundreds of fast attack craft swarming the littorals. The threat density is absolute. The reaction time is zero. Now look at the flight deck of the Lincoln. Look at the F/A-18 Super Hornets. What are they carrying? If you zoom in on the pylons, you won't see 2,000-pound bombs. You will see AIM-9X Sidewinders. You will see AIM-120 AMRAAMs. This is the overloaded shield. Because the carrier is operating so far from the target to stay safe, the Super Hornet fleet is forced to play defense. They are the immune system of the strike group. They are flying combat air patrols, CAP, 24/7. Their job is to swat down suicide drones. Their job is to sink the swarm of speedboats trying to ram the hull. Every F-18 dedicated to saving the ship is an F-18 that cannot be used to strike the enemy. The offensive firepower of the carrier strike group has been locked into a defensive posture. The shield is up, but the sword is sheathed. So you ask, what about the F-35C? The Lincoln carries the Black Knights of VM FA-314. The F-35C is the solution, right? Wrong. The F-35C faces the physics of stealth. This aircraft is a miracle of engineering. It can fly through a radar net without generating a return signal. But to do that, it must carry all its munitions internally. Open the schematic. Look at the internal weapon bays. They are small. They are designed for air-to-air missiles or 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDAMs. A GBU-31 is a formidable weapon. It destroys buildings. It destroys bridges. But the enemy knows this. That is why the enemy has spent the last 2 decades digging. The nuclear program, the command and control centers, they are not on the surface. They are buried deep underground. They are encased in layers of steel and high-density concrete. To kill them, you need a penetrator. You need a specialized weapon. And here is the friction point. The weapons required to crack those bunkers physically do not fit inside the F-35C. If you hang them on the wings, you lose stealth. If you lose stealth, the S-300s kill you. So here is the dilemma. We have the shield, the F-18, but it is overwhelmed protecting the ship. We have the scalpel, the F-35, but it lacks the mass to cut through the bone. We are staring at a 10-meter thick wall of concrete, and we are holding a pocket knife. We need a sledgehammer. Enter the solution, the kinetic solution, the 494th Fighter Squadron, the Panthers. Let's strip away the nostalgia. The F-15E Strike Eagle is not a fighter in the modern sense. It is a platform engineered for kinetic saturation. Look at the numbers. Maximum takeoff weight, 81,000 pounds. That is 40 tons of aluminum and titanium screaming into the sky. Payload capacity, 23,000 pounds. That is 10.5 tons of ordnance. Do the math. One F-15E Strike Eagle can carry the explosive payload of 3 F-35s combined. This is not precision strikes. This is industrial delivery. But we didn't bring them here for standard bombs. We brought them here for one specific weapon that solves the geometry problem, the GBU-72 Advanced 5K Penetrator. Forget the old stories about bombs made from gun barrels. That was 1991. This is 2026. The GBU-72 is 5,000 pounds of specialized Eglin steel alloy. It is a kinetic needle. To understand why this weapon exists, you have to understand the physics of the nail. To drive a nail through reinforced concrete, weight isn't enough. You need sectional density. Here is the engineering reality. Most gravity bombs have thin steel skins. When they hit a hardened bunker at Mach 0.8, they fail structurally. They deform. They pancake on impact, and the energy dissipates sideways instead of downwards. The GBU-72 is different. Its casing is forged from high-performance alloy designed to contain an explosion, not just deliver one. It does not crumple. It transfers 100% of its kinetic energy into a single, concentrated point. Inside that steel casing sits the smart fuse. This device is designed to survive an impact shock of over 10,000 Gs. It does not detonate on contact. It feels the deceleration. It waits. It burrows through 30 feet of earth and 10 feet of concrete. It waits until it detects the void of the room inside. Only then does it trigger. But to activate that physics equation, you need terminal velocity. You need to drop it from the stratosphere. And this creates a launch platform requirement that disqualifies almost every other aircraft in the inventory. To drop a GBU-72, you need an aircraft with a frame strong enough to carry a 5,000-pound load on the centerline without snapping the titanium spar. You need engines powerful enough to drag that weight up to 30,000 feet to give the bomb enough potential energy to reach penetration speed. The F-35 cannot do it. The bay is too small. The F-18 cannot do it. It lacks the legs and the thrust-to-weight ratio to haul that load deep into enemy territory and return. Only the F-15E has the brute mechanical capacity to do this job. But it's not just about weight. It's about station time. Look at the fuselage of the Strike Eagle. Those ugly bulges on the sides are conformal fuel tanks, CFTs. They increase drag, yes, but they hold thousands of pounds of extra jet fuel without taking up a weapon station. This gives the F-15E the ability to loiter. It can take off from a remote strip, fly to the Persian Gulf, and sit in the sky. It waits. It circles. It becomes a floating magazine of high explosives. When the Lincoln signals a target, the F-15 doesn't have to launch. It is already there. It engages the afterburners. The Pratt & Whitney F-100 engines dump raw fuel into the exhaust. It pushes 40 tons of metal past the sound barrier. It turns potential energy, altitude, and chemical energy, fuel, into kinetic energy, speed. It becomes the fastest, heaviest response team on the planet. But there is a flaw in the plan. On a modern radar scope, the F-15E is not a bird. It is a flying barn door. In a vacuum, the Iranian air defense network would chew it up and spit it out before it ever released a weapon. This brings us to the integrated logic. Warfare in 2026 is not a dogfight. It is not Top Gun. It is a data management process. We call this networked lethality. The machine never fights alone. Watch the sequence. The cycle begins in silence. The F-35C launches from the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea and pushes into the red zone. But the pilot keeps his radar off. He flies in passive mode. He is a ghost. Using the EOTS, the electro-optical targeting system, he visually scans the desert floor. He sniffs the electromagnetic spectrum. He detects the pulse of the Iranian S-300 radar. He locates the ventilation shafts of the underground bunkers. He finds the target, but he does not shoot. He simply sends a burst of data. That signal wakes up the enabler. Miles away, the EA-18G Growler receives the coordinates. This is the most important aircraft you never hear about. The Growler activates its ALQ-99 jamming pods. It doesn't fire bullets, it fires energy. It blasts the specific frequencies of the enemy radar with high-power noise, creating a strobe on the enemy screens. It blinds the S-300. It confuses the guidance loops. The Growler effectively carves an invisible corridor through the enemy airspace, a tunnel of static. And through that open tunnel, the executioner arrives. Now, and only now, does the F-15E enter the fight. The Strike Eagle dives into the corridor carved by the Growler. The pilot doesn't need to search for the target. The F-35 already sent the grid. The pilot doesn't need to dodge missiles. The Growler has already blinded the shooters. The F-15E is simply the delivery mechanism. It releases the GBU-72. The weapon falls. Physics takes over. 5,000 pounds of hardened steel slams into the desert floor. It penetrates the bunker. It detonates. The target is erased. This is the reality of the kill chain. The F-15E is the muscle, but the muscle is useless without the brain of the F-35 and the nervous system of the Growler. We didn't bring the F-15E to replace the carrier. We brought it to complete the circuit. But the engineering doesn't stop in the air. To truly understand Agile Spartan, you have to look at the ground. War is not just about shooting. War is about basing. For the last 20 years, the U.S. Air Force operated out of massive super bases like Al Udeid in Qatar. We built Starbucks, we built swimming pools, we built concrete palaces. But in 2026, those palaces are death traps. Iranian ballistic missiles have those coordinates hard-coded into their guidance systems. They can wipe out a fixed runway in the first 10 minutes of a conflict. And if your runway is a crater, your F-15 is just a very expensive paperweight. So the doctrine has changed. We call it ACE, Agile Combat Employment. This is the strategy of the Nomad. It begins with dispersion. The 494th Squadron no longer parks its jets in a neat little row. That is a target-rich environment. Instead, they split the wolf pack. They fracture the squadron into small, mobile elements. Some jets deploy to austere contingency airfields with no names. Others divert to backup runways that barely appear on civilian maps. They don't rely on established infrastructure, they rely on geographic anonymity. By scattering the force, you jam the enemy's targeting calculus. Instead of aiming at one massive coordinate, the enemy has to hunt for a dozen moving variables. You dilute their fire. You bankrupt their missile supply by forcing them to chase ghosts. But scattering your jets creates a logistics nightmare. How do you fuel a squadron that is spread across 1,000 miles of empty desert? You strip away the red tape. You initiate the hot pit. Watch the process. An F-15E lands after a strike mission. It taxis to the end of the runway, but the pilot does not shut down. The canopy stays closed. The radar stays online. The Pratt & Whitney